Greetings everyone, welcome to the 10th episode of Churches of Wales Season 1. In this series, I take a look at buildings part of the church in Wales and covenanted churches in Wales. In the last episode, I looked at churches in South Radnorshire, where I saw many beautiful buildings in settlements like Gladystre, Colver, Michael Church on Arrow, and more. In this episode, I will look at churches situated around the towns of Llandrindod Wells and Rhayader, and this is the final episode in the series where I will look at churches in the historic county of Radnorshire. I am Fabian Mustoe, and I present you the first season of Churches of Wales. In order to find these churches, I will use the Ordnance Survey map on Geograph as my reference for spotting church symbols, from maps of the 1920s, to maps of the 2010s and 20s. I apologize if some of my pronunciations of these place names are incorrect, since I am not a Welsh speaker. The first church I am at is situated east of the A470 road, and this is dedicated to St. John the Divine. This was built from 1886 to 87 to the designs of J.B. Fowler of Brecon, and the construction was funded by Clara Thomas of this country house in Breconshire, who dedicated the church in memory of her mother who died in 1877. This is recorded on an inscription in the west wall. The church has stained glass from 1887 and the 20th century, and the glass in the porch windows date from 1929. The church was Grade 2 listed in November 2004. The Church of All Saints in Newbridge-on-Wye is east of the A470 road, and this was built to the designs of S.W. Williams of Rhayader in 1883. The building was constructed of thinly coursed pink sandstone rubble, with green rock-faced quoins and Bath stone tracery. The windows have stained glass by C.E. Kemp, and the church was Grade 2 listed in November 2004. The village has an English Baptist church that is northwest from the church, and this was built in 1879 of the Italianate style. This replaced two earlier chapel buildings on the site, and they were built in 1760 and 1828 respectively. Situated east from Newbridge-on-Wye is this rural parish church, which is by a caravan park and the River Ethon. This church is dedicated to this saint from the 6th century, and the west bell tower of 3 stages presumably dates from the 18th century or earlier. The building consists of a nave and chancel, and the 5-bay arched brace roof with tie beams presumably dates from the 14th century. The interior has a complete set of box pews from the 17th to 19th century, and these have Jacobean-style diamonds and circles. The oldest pew dates from 1666, the year of the Great Fire of London. There is a faded wall painting of Queen and Royal arms from the early 18th century, and a number of wall paintings were discovered in the building in 1954. The exterior was restored in the 19th century, and the Jacobean to Georgian interior was not restored. The church was Grade 1 listed in May 1962. 2 miles south from Llandrindod Wells is St. David Church, which replaced an earlier church 10 yards south, built of iron during the 19th century. The new church was built to the designs of R. Wellings Thomas in 1904, and this is situated by the A483 road. This does not have listed status as of 2022. Northeast from the church is the Providence English Baptist Church, first built in 1853. This was replaced by a building from 1898, built in the simple round-headed style. This is still in use as a place of worship. South of the town of Llandrindod Wells is Holy Trinity Church, originally built in the 13th or 14th century, but was rebuilt from 1894 to 95 by Thomas and William Williams of Brecon. The church is known as the Old Parish Church, since this was the parish church in Llandrindod Wells prior to the construction of another church dedicated to the Holy Trinity in the town. The building was extended to the west in 1911 by R. Wellings Thomas, and the plan consists of a nave and chancel with no division. The stained glass in the east end window was installed by Celtic Studios of Swansea in 1951. The octagonal stone font from the 15th century is in the east end of the nave, and the church does not have listed status as of November 2022. North of the lake are the foundations of a Norman chapel, and the plan of the church is one of the earliest known in Wales. The rounded apses were added in the 13th century, when they replaced the chancel and west end of the nave. The church was presumably abandoned during the 16th century, and the ruins were demolished in the early 19th century. The site was excavated from 1984 to 87, and the finds are in the Radnorshire Museum in Temple Street. The church foundations were reconstructed by the lake during this time, since residential housing was built on the old site afterwards. Placed on Spa Road East is the former Wesleyan Methodist Church to St. John, built in 1907 to the design of Ewan Harper and brother of Birmingham. The bell tower was never completed, and the chapel closed during the 1950s. After housing offices for Powys County Council from 1996 to 2011, the building housed a New Life Pentecostal Church from 2012. The New Life Church was based in Temple Street prior to 2012, and this was housed in a structure from the late 20th century. Placed by the A4081 road is the parish church of the Holy Trinity, designed in 1871 by Thomas Nicholson of Hereford. The building was known as Christ Church until it was dedicated to the Holy Trinity in 1881, and the building plan consisted of the south nave, aisle and chancel. The building was remodeled in 1895, when the central nave and chancel were built, and R. Wellings Thomas added a north nave and double chancel in 1910. He planned to add a clerestory and steeple to the building, which never happened, but a low tower housing 8 bells was built in 1995. The arcades on round columns date from 1871, and the openwork north chancel screen is from 1910, designed in the perpendicular Gothic style. The north chancel has a double hammerbeam roof from 1910, and there are 7 angels at the base of some of the roof trusses. The stained glass in the east end of the north chancel dates from 1908, and there are other stained glass windows in the church, installed by Florence Cam and Celtic Studios in 1932 and 1970 respectively. The church was Grade 2 listed in September 1985. The Calvinistic Methodist Chapel on Eathon Road was first built in 1870, and this was replaced with an arts and crafts style building from 1905, designed by W. B. Rees of Cardiff. The Albert Hall is west of the chapel, built in 1896 to the designs of Owen Morris Roberts and son of Porthmadog. The chapel houses an English Presbyterian church as of 2022, and the buildings were Grade 2 listed in September 1985. The Christ Church Congregational Chapel was situated by the roundabout near Rock Park, built in 1907 by W. B. Rees of Cardiff. This replaced an earlier chapel from 1871, but the building of 1907 was demolished in the late 20th century. The rose window at the west side of the demolished church is integrated in the new building. Set back from Victoria Road is the Catholic Church of Our Lady of Ransom and the Holy Souls, founded by the Society of Jesus in 1907. This was to be the only Jesuit foundation in central Wales, until they handed over the administration of the parish to the Diocese of Menevia in the mid-20th century. The building was rebuilt from 1970 to 71, and the interior houses an organ from 1823 at a Methodist church in Dudley, although the organ was rebuilt in 1971. The Tabernacle English Baptist Church was built in 1907 by E. Peters Morris, a local architect, which presumably replaced an earlier chapel building from 1876. This building was demolished during the 1990s, when the church moved to a new building west of the High Street in 1994. The Quakers established a congregation at Llandrindod in 1893, and they built the Friends Meeting House in 1897 on land they bought that year. Built in the subclassical style, The building was sold to the Elim Pentecostal Church in 1985, although this closed during the 2000s. Placed in Middleton Street is the Evangelical Church, housed in a stone building from the 19th century. The church is also based at the English Baptist Church in Rock, situated 4 miles north from the town. Placed on Waterloo Road was the site of a Baptist chapel, built in 1876. This was demolished in the late 20th century to make way for a house. Situated northwest is the former United Reformed Church, founded in 1715 as an independent nonconformist chapel by the Reverend Thomas Jones of Tetbury. The chapel was first built in 1717, which was rebuilt in the vernacular style in 1804. The interior dates from 1840, with complete box pews and candelabras. The chapel closed as a place of worship in June 2019, and the building was Grade 2 listed in September 1985. A mile northwest from Llandrindod is this village, which has a parish church that dates from 1885 to 87, designed by S. W. Williams of Rhayader. The present building is the third building on the site, and the 2 early buildings may have been medieval. There are 9 yew trees in the churchyard, and 6 of them surround the building. The interior has a font that may be Norman, and the building plan consists of a nave, chancel and 3-sided apse. The window in the west end consists of 5 lights, and this is the largest window in the church. The church does not have listed status as of 2022. 2 miles east of Llandrindod is a remote church by the River Ethon, and the site can only be accessed by foot. This is by the earthworks of a Mott and Bailey castle, and the church was built during the 13th century. The building was restored in 1895, after the rector of Llandrindod unroofed the church in an attempt to persuade the parishioners to attend the new town church. The chancel screen dates from the 15th century, and the pulpit reuses panelling from the old pews, dating from 1660. The church was Grade 2 listed in December 1952. West of the A483 road is a church by S. W. Williams of Rhayader, built from 1878 to 79 on the site of a medieval church. The church is dedicated to this saint from the early 6th century AD, and the original building consisted of a crossing tower, nave, chancel and south transept. The tympanum over the south doorway dates from the mid-12th century, and the carvings are reminiscent of the Herefordshire school of Romanesque sculpture. The plan of the present building excludes the transept, although there are 2 vestries at the west end of the church. This was Grade 2 star listed in December 1952. Placed south of Nantmel is St. Michael Church, partly rebuilt in 1812 on the site of a medieval church. The building is in the Georgian style, which is evident with the windows. The interior is also Georgian, although the 5-bay arched brace roof dates from the 16th century. This church is in a remote setting, and was Grade 2 star listed in December 1952. 2 miles east of Nantmel is this hamlet, which used to have a Calvinistic Methodist chapel by the A44 road. First built in 1842 and rebuilt in 1880, the building was demolished in 1987. Northwest from that settlement is a rural United Reformed Church, built around 1829 in the vernacular style. The interior dates from that year, with the gallery, clock and 4 rows of wooden benches left unaltered. The Carmel Independent Chapel was Grade 2 star listed in November 1997. The parish church in Nantmel is situated high above the village, and this was built by David Thomas of Rhayader in 1792. Dedicated to this saint from the early 6th century, the present building replaced a medieval church, and was restored in the neo-Norman style in 1881. The church was Grade 2 listed in February 2005. Half a mile west from the church is an English Baptist church, which is by the A44 road. This was first built in 1767 by Richard Walker, and was rebuilt and enlarged in the Italianate style in 1826. In the west end of Nantmel parish is this church dedicated to St. Mark, built in 1870 to the designs of John Norton. There is a monkey puzzle tree in the church grounds. 2 miles east from Rhayader is the site of a mission church dedicated to St. David, presumably built in the mid or late 19th century. This building was demolished during the 20th century, and the foundations are the only remnants of the church. Here is St. Clement Parish Church in the market town of Rhayader, established to serve the Motte and Bailey Castle, and the church at this time was dedicated to this saint from the early 6th century. The medieval church building collapsed in 1772, which was replaced by a new building 3 years later. The West Bell Tower was built in 1783, repaired in 1829 and rebuilt in 1888. The North Aisle was built in 1867, with the organ and sanctuary added in 1900. The building does not have listed status as of 2022, and the church is by the River Wye. Rhayader is the first town on the Wye. The Bethany Calvinistic Methodist Chapel is situated in Church Street, and this was first built in 1822. This was rebuilt in the sub-classical style in 1867. The town library east of Church Street is on the site of the Sion Wesleyan Methodist Chapel. The chapel was first built in 1809, rebuilt in 1818 and rebuilt again in 1836. The building was demolished during the 20th century. Placed by the B4518 road is the Tabernacle United Reformed Church, first built in 1721, rebuilt in 1778 and rebuilt again in 1836. Built in the simple Gothic style, this was Grade II listed in December 1952. Here is the Bethel English Baptist Church in South Street, built around 1880. This replaced an earlier chapel on North Street, built in 1839 and demolished by 1900. The site of the old chapel is by the leisure centre, and east of that is the Catholic Church of St. Francis of Assisi. This was built in 1959 by Philip Beard of Wakefield, and the dalle de verglas was installed by Dom Charles Norris of Buckfast Abbey, Devon. Rhayader is on the right bank of the River Wye, and on the left bank is this village, which has a church dedicated to St. Bride, built by F.R. Kempson in 1865. This replaced a church structure from 1778, which replaced the medieval church on the site. To the right of the south doorway is a stoop from the medieval church, which consists of 3 primitive heads. The church was Grade II listed in July 1995. 3.5 miles north from Rhayader is the parish church of St. Garman in this village, built on the site of a monastery established by St. Garman during the 6th century AD. This monastery was dissolved by 1066, and was subsequently replaced with a church structure. That was demolished in 1821, replaced with a small church structure by W. Evans, and the Reverend Francis Kilvert was vicar of the church from 1876 to 77, although he described the building as hideous since it had not been repaired since it was built. The building was restored by R. Wellings Thomas in 1908, where he narrowed the chancel, added perpendicular tracery and removed the bell turret. The bell now hangs on the north wall of the vestry. R. Wellings Thomas also restored the interior, and Celtic Studios installed a stained glass window of St. Garman in 1979. The church does not have listed status as of 2022. Placed by the B4518 road is the site of a Wesleyan Methodist chapel, built in 1807. The building was demolished in the late 20th century. 1.5 miles north from the village is a Calvinistic Methodist chapel, which closed for worship during the 20th century. The polychrome brick building dates from 1888. 1 mile north is an English Baptist church from 1877, built by W. Evans of Rhayader. This replaced an earlier chapel building in the simple round-headed style from 1792. 1/2 mile northwest is a Calvinistic Methodist chapel from 1825, built in the vernacular style. Now an English Presbyterian church, this was Grade II listed in March 2000. 3.5 miles southwest from Rhayader is Elan Village, which has a Baptist chapel built in 1900. This stone structure was built in the Romanesque style, and is north from the river Elan. This building replaced an old chapel 2 miles southwest, which was submerged in 1900 as part of the Elan Valley reservoirs. This chapel was built in 1845, and was used as a social institute by the Water Committee staff during the construction of the reservoir and dam. Placed by the site of the First Baptist Chapel is a late Victorian church, built from 1898 to 1900 by Stephen Williams. This replaced an old church dedicated to St. Mark, which was also submerged by the reservoirs in 1905. This building was possibly medieval, although the porch looks like it was built in later centuries. The new church has a nave and chancel, and the building does not have listed status as of 2022. I am standing on top of this dam to end this episode, the last episode in the series where I will look at churches in the historic county of Radnorshire. I enjoyed looking at religious buildings in this historic county, as well as the religious buildings I looked at in this episode. I will begin looking at the historic county of Breconshire in the next episode, where I will look at religious buildings to the west of Llandrindod Wells.